You know what nobody tells you about marriage? They sell you this fantasy about for better or worse, like it's some beautiful romantic promise, but they never explain what happens when worse actually kicks down your door and moves in permanently. I'm Brooklyn. I'm 32, and up until last year I thought I had this whole wife and mother thing completely figured out. My husband Mitchell worked for some tech company making really good money, like really good money, and I stayed home with our 3 kids, living what I thought was the perfect life. When we first got together, back in high school, Mitchell was this ambitious guy who always talked about providing for his future family someday. He wasn't just talking either, he actually delivered on every single promise he made. After college, he landed this position at some financial software company, making more money than my parents had ever seen in their lives. I got pregnant with Carson, pretty much right after I started my first real job out of college, and it just made sense for me to stay home. His salary was already way more than mine anyway, and between you and me, I wasn't exactly devastated about ditching the whole career thing before it even started. Carson came first, then Iris 2 years later, then Owen 3 years after that. Mitchell never complained once about being the sole provider. If anything, he seemed to thrive on it. He'd come home from work and immediately want to help with homework, play with the kids, do all that hands-on dad stuff that some of my friends' husbands couldn't be bothered with. Sometimes I'd joke that he was trying to make me look bad as a parent, but honestly, I loved having a husband who actually gave a damn about his family. Our sex life was incredible. We rarely fought about anything serious, and our biggest problem was usually deciding between different vacation destinations. I kept telling myself I'd go back to work once Owen started kindergarten, but then Mitchell got promoted to senior level, and suddenly we could afford even more nice things. Private riding lessons for Iris, competitive travel baseball for Carson, a housekeeper twice a week, so I didn't have to scrub toilets like some kind of maid. Why would I want to go back to some entry-level position, making peanuts when we were living like this? Mitchell seemed perfectly happy with the arrangement too. He'd always say how proud he was that he could give us the kind of life he'd dreamed about when we were broke college students eating ramen noodles every night. Looking back now, I can see he was probably working his ass off to maintain our lifestyle. But at the time I just thought this was how our life was supposed to be. The kids absolutely worshipped their dad, probably because he was the one buying them everything they wanted and taking them on these amazing trips every few months. Mitchell never said no to anything. New equipment for Carson's baseball, designer clothes for Iris, whatever random toy Owen was obsessing over that week. I started thinking maybe we were spoiling them a little, but Mitchell would just shrug and say, "What's the point of working this hard if we can't enjoy it?" And honestly, he had a point. We were happy, we were comfortable, and I thought we were building something that would last forever. The foundation felt rock solid, you know? Like nothing could really shake what we'd created together as a family. Last December changed absolutely everything. Mitchell came home one evening looking like he'd been hit by a bus, just standing there in our kitchen doorway while I was making dinner. At first I thought maybe something terrible had happened to someone in his family, or he was having some kind of medical emergency, because he looked genuinely traumatized. When he finally managed to tell me his company was restructuring and his position was being eliminated, I didn't even understand what that meant initially. But no, gone, completely eliminated. They offered him something in a different department, but it came with almost a 40% pay cut. 40%. Do you have any idea what 40% of our lifestyle looks like? That's Iris's riding lessons, Carson's travel team, our vacation fund, the housekeeper, probably one of the car payments, maybe even some of the mortgage. I tried to be supportive at first. I really did try my best. I told him we'd figure it out together, that he'd find something better soon. All the things you're supposed to say when your entire world gets turned upside down. But honestly, I was completely panicking inside, even though I tried not to show it. The first thing that had to go was my car lease. Mitchell kept his, since he needed reliable transportation for work, but my payment was absolutely ridiculous. and we just couldn't afford it anymore. So suddenly, I'm driving this beat-up Honda that his mom had given us years ago, and every time I pulled up somewhere, I felt like everyone was staring and judging. Then, we had to break the devastating news to the kids about cutting their extracurricular activities. Iris completely lost her mind about the horseback riding thing, full-on screaming and sobbing for hours like we'd told her someone had died. Carson took it better on the surface, but I could see in his eyes that he was furious too. And Mitchell? He just seemed to completely shrink into himself. This confident, take-charge guy I'd married suddenly transformed into someone who apologized for everything and walked around looking utterly defeated. He kept saying he'd find something better soon, that this was just a temporary setback. But weeks kept dragging by, and nothing was happening. Meanwhile, I'm dealing with 3 miserable kids, having to make embarrassing excuses to our friends about why we couldn't do certain things anymore. And basically watching our entire carefully constructed life crumble while he sent out resumes that apparently disappeared into some black hole. I started noticing little things about him that irritated me more and more each day. The way he'd sit hunched over his laptop for hours looking pathetic, the hopeful expression he'd get whenever his phone rang, how he'd try to act like everything was going to be fine when it obviously wasn't. And if I'm being completely honest here, I started resenting the hell out of him. Not for losing the job initially. That wasn't his fault. Shit happens in corporate America. But for not fixing it fast enough. For not having some kind of backup plan ready. For letting us become so completely dependent on one income that we were basically screwed the minute something went wrong. Between you and me, I started wondering if this defeated, apologetic version was actually the real Mitchell. Not the successful provider I thought I'd married. I didn't just wake up one morning and decide to become a complete bitch to my husband. It happened gradually, like when you don't realize how cold you're getting until you're already shivering. At first, I was still doing all the traditional wife things, packing his lunches, keeping the house perfect, all of it. But then one morning, I just didn't feel like making his sandwich anymore. He was a grown man. He could handle that basic task himself for once. When he asked me about it later, I told him I wasn't in the mood to do it anymore. And the absolutely pathetic look on his face actually made me angrier instead of guilty. Then I stopped with the goodbye kisses when he left for work each morning. What was the point? He was going to a job that paid him barely more than I could probably make working at Target, and he was just grateful to have it. Where was the ambition I'd fallen in love with? Where was the guy who used to talk confidently about climbing the corporate ladder and building something impressive? This new version of Mitchell seemed perfectly content to accept whatever scraps they threw at him, and frankly, it was a complete turnoff. The kids noticed the change in how I was treating their father way before he did. Carson started asking me why I was acting weird with Dad, and Iris actually had the nerve to tell me I was being mean. But honestly, I felt like I was the only person in this entire house who understood how completely fucked we really were. Mitchell was walking around acting like everything would magically work out. The kids were still expecting their old lifestyle to come back, and I was the only one dealing with actual reality. When Owen asked why we couldn't go to that expensive indoor water park, like we'd planned, Mitchell just said, "Maybe next year, buddy." Like that was supposed to make everything okay. I stopped initiating any kind of physical contact after that conversation. If Mitchell wanted to touch me or be intimate, he was going to have to earn it by actually fixing our situation first. I wasn't about to pretend to be turned on by a man who couldn't maintain the life we'd built together. And honestly, he didn't even fight for it. He'd try sometimes, reaching for me in bed or attempting to kiss me, but when I'd turn away or make some excuse, he'd just accept it and roll over to his side. Even that reaction pissed me off, like, show some backbone and fight for your wife a little bit, you know? The only conversations we had anymore were about money or his endless job search. He'd tell me about interviews that went nowhere, applications that never got responses, networking events that led to nothing, and all I could think was, try harder. Other husbands were out there making things happen for their families. My friend Sarah's husband started his own consulting business when he got laid off and was already making more than his old salary within 6 months. But Mitchell? Mitchell just seemed completely broken by the whole experience. And if I'm being totally honest here, defeat is not attractive. At all. I married a man who could take care of his family and handle whatever life threw at us, not someone who'd roll over and accept whatever circumstances handed him. The absolute worst part came on Mitchell's birthday, and I know exactly how this is going to sound, but I genuinely forgot about it. Not on purpose or anything malicious. I just had so much other shit on my mind dealing with our new reality that it didn't even register until he mentioned it that morning. By then, what was I supposed to do? Run out and buy some last-minute gift with money we didn't have for a man who'd basically failed his family? The kids forgot too, which honestly just proved my point that this entire family was falling apart at the seams. Instead of just letting it slide like a normal person would, Mitchell actually brought it up that night. He didn't even do it confrontationally. He just looked so incredibly sad and asked if anyone remembered what day it was. And instead of feeling bad for him, I felt irritated as hell. Like, read the room, dude. We're barely keeping our heads above water financially. The kids are miserable about everything they've had to give up. And you want us to celebrate? Celebrate what exactly? Your spectacular failure to maintain what we'd spent years building together? When he started actually crying, real tears rolling down his face like some kind of child, I completely lost it. I told him exactly what I'd been thinking for months, that I'd get back to being a loving wife when he got back to being the man I actually married. When we had our nice car back, when Iris could ride horses again, when our life stopped being this constant source of stress about money and went back to being what it was supposed to be. I told him I wasn't going to fake being happy about our situation, just to make him feel better about disappointing his entire family. The look on his face when I said all that was like watching something completely shatter. But instead of making me want to take it back, it made me want to say even more. So I did. I told him that being married to a man who couldn't provide was absolutely exhausting. That watching him mope around the house instead of making real changes was pathetic. And that maybe if he'd worked harder to keep his original position, or been smarter about having a backup plan, we wouldn't be in this nightmare situation. He stared at me for what felt like forever, and then he said he wanted a divorce. Just like that. No discussion, no let's work on this together, absolutely nothing. He got up, started throwing clothes into a bag, and told me he'd be in touch through lawyers about custody arrangements. I kept waiting for him to stop and apologize, or for this to turn into a normal fight where we'd both cool off and figure things out later. But he didn't stop. He walked out that night, and I haven't lived with him since. So now I'm a single mom to 3 kids, living in a house I can't afford on my own, dealing with divorce lawyers and complicated custody schedules, and somehow I'm supposed to feel guilty about this whole situation. Mitchell's been staying at his cousin's place across town, and according to the kids, he seems perfectly fine. Better than fine, actually. Iris mentioned that his apartment is surprisingly nice, and that he's been cooking actual meals for them when they visit, instead of ordering takeout. Cooking, like that's some kind of impressive life skill that deserves recognition. The divorce papers showed up last week, and they're actually more generous than I expected them to be. He's not trying to take the house or fight me on custody. The kids will stay with me during the week, and go to him every other weekend plus Wednesday nights. He's even agreed to keep paying the mortgage until we can figure out something more permanent. But here's the thing that really pisses me off. He got a new job. A better job, making even more than his original position that he lost. Apparently, he'd been interviewing with this company for months, but didn't want to tell me in case it didn't work out. So while I was here dealing with our shitty situation and trying to hold our family together, he was already planning his escape route. The kids came back from his place last weekend, talking about how happy he seemed, how he'd been working out consistently, how he'd bought himself an entire new wardrobe. Carson even said Dad told them he was excited about the future, for the first time in months. Meanwhile, I'm here figuring out what it actually means to be a single parent. Turns out, when you don't have a husband handling all the financial planning and bill paying, you learn real quick how much everything actually costs. And when you don't have someone to tag in when the kids are being difficult, you realize exactly how much work parenting actually is. Mitchell used to handle most of Owen's elaborate bedtime routine, and now that little shit fights me every single night about everything. Brushing teeth, picking up toys, going to sleep. I've started looking into going back to work, but it's not exactly simple when you've been out of the workforce for over a decade. Most of the positions I'm qualified for pay barely enough to cover childcare costs, and the ones that pay decent money want experience I obviously don't have. And honestly, I'm bitter as hell that it's come to this point. I didn't sign up to be a divorced mom, scrambling to make ends meet and rebuild my entire life from scratch. 4 months after the divorce was finalized, Mitchell looks like a completely different person. He came to pick up the kids last Friday, and when I saw him through the window, I barely recognized him. He's been working out seriously, dressing much better, and he had this energy about him that I honestly hadn't seen in years. Not just since he lost his original job. I mean years before that even happened. The kids can't shut up about his new apartment, his new position, how much fun they have with him on weekends. I found out through Carson that Mitchell's been seeing someone new. Not anything serious, apparently. But still, some woman from his new company who's also divorced with kids of her own. And the thing that really gets under my skin? The kids actually like her. Owen came home talking about how she taught him to make pancakes from scratch, and Iris mentioned that she has a daughter who's into competitive horseback riding too. Of course she fucking does. But here's what keeps eating at me. I'm not the villain in this story. Everyone wants to act like I'm some horrible person for not being supportive enough during his rough patch. But where exactly was my support? I spent 14 years of my life building a home and raising his children while he got to have a career and an identity outside these 4 walls. The minute things got tough, I was supposed to just smile and pretend everything was perfectly fine. I was supposed to fake being attracted to a man who couldn't maintain the life we'd spent years building together. The worst part is how everyone, his family, our mutual friends, even my own kids sometimes, acts like I should have stood by him through the hard times. But nobody wants to talk about how he abandoned our marriage the minute I stopped playing the grateful, supportive wife role. He didn't fight for us. He didn't try to understand where I was coming from or what I needed. He just decided it was easier to start over with someone who didn't have any real expectations. I'm working now at a medical office downtown, answering phones and scheduling appointments for doctors. The pay is decent enough to cover my basic expenses, but it's definitely not the life I had planned for myself. The kids are adjusting to our new routine, but they clearly prefer their time with their father. He gets to be the fun parent now. No financial stress, no bitter ex-wife to deal with, just quality time and new adventures every weekend. Meanwhile, I'm the one stuck dealing with homework battles every night, grocery shopping with coupons like some kind of struggling single mom, and trying to explain to 3 kids why we can't afford the things we used to have. Carson asked me last week why I stopped being nice to Dad, and I didn't even know how to answer that question. How do you explain to a 14-year-old that sometimes love isn't enough when everything else falls apart? How do you tell your kid that you married someone expecting them to be strong enough to handle whatever life threw at them, and when they weren't, everything else just crumbled too? So yeah, I stopped loving my husband when he stopped being the man I fell in love with and married. And now he's moved on with his shiny new life and better job while I'm stuck here dealing with all the aftermath. But I'm not apologizing for having standards and expectations. I'm not apologizing for expecting my partner to maintain what we built together as a team. And I'm damn sure not apologizing for being honest about what I needed from my marriage to feel fulfilled and secure. Mitchell got to walk away and start completely fresh. And somehow, that makes him the good guy in everyone else's version of this story. But I'm the one left here dealing with the real consequences of his failure to provide, and nobody seems to give a shit about that part of the equation.